We literally just talked about this in my earlier video. I recorded that video early this morning, waited and waited for YouTube to approve it for ads. It'll get approved eventually. Hopefully. It will. But I just talked about putting myself in someone else's shoes when they make a mistake. Context is everything. Without context, anything can be spun, anything can be taken and spun to fit a narrative. It doesn't matter what the narrative is. It could be a political related narrative. It could be something to ruin someone's career. For example, let's say someone has bugged my house. They place a bug in my living room or in my Forerunner, both places where I do most of my talking on the phone. Or I have a visitor in the house or vehicle with me. Me and my friends, we speak to each other like men speak when they've known each other for over 20 years. The bug records me answering a phone call from one of my friends, and we're joking around. We're saying things that in context is clearly just two friends messing around with each other. But if the recording was only my end of the conversation and it was released publicly, it would sound terrible. It would be offensive. If the full recording were to be released and played with context, people would understand. Or I should say, most people would understand. We all know there is a segment of the population that gets offended by any and everything. The point is, context matters. When you spend hours upon hours every week speaking in a public forum, you are going to slip up. You're going to make a mistake at some point. It's inevitable. It happens to everyone. The context of the mistake matters. It's important. Was there malicious intent? Did this person say something with the intent of hurting someone else? Or was it simply a misunderstanding? Was something said that makes sense in a particular situation, but when things are uncovered after the fact, it appears to be worse? Glenn Consor is a veteran broadcaster. He has been broadcasting NBA games for the Washington Wizards for over 20 years. That is important to the context. Over a 20-year career, I couldn't find one occurrence of controversy with Glenn Consor. I couldn't find one thing that he has said that was malicious, hateful. Now, I'm sure over the course of 20 years, Glenn Consor has said something off color at some point, but for the most part, he has had a relatively quiet broadcasting career. I have been watching the NBA my entire life. I've never heard of the guy until earlier today. Last night, the Rockets were in Washington, D.C. to play the Wizards. With the final seconds ticking down in the fourth quarter, Rockets guard Kevin Porter Jr. drains a last-second three to give the Rockets the win. Here is Glenn Consor calling the play.
What a well-designed play, and you got to give credit. Kevin Porter Jr., like his dad, pulled that trigger right at the right time.
10 years ago, this would be a non-story. Hell, maybe even 5 years ago, this would be a non-story. But in these modern times we're living in, where people are literally employed to search for something to be offended with, that call has Glenn Consor in the crosshairs of cancel culture. Kevin Porter Sr. played in the NBA from 1972 to 1983, including a stint in Washington. Obviously, Glenn Consor had some type of familiarity with Kevin Porter Sr. If you listen to that clip and didn't have any of the backstory, you would assume former NBA player Kevin Porter Sr. is the father of Kevin Porter Jr. That assumption would be incorrect. The father of Kevin Porter Jr. spent 4 years in prison for killing a 14-year-old girl. He was initially charged with first-degree murder. Obviously, that charge was reduced. Kevin Porter Sr. at the time claimed that the gun was accidentally discharged, and judging by the 4-year sentence, I would assume all parties involved agreed. After Kevin Porter Sr. was released from prison, he was murdered. He got into an altercation at a bar in 2004. He was shot 5 times. The question is, did Glenn Consor know any of this? I don't think he did. He would have to be a dumbass to know the background of Kevin Porter Jr. and say something like that, especially in this era of cancel culture. The SJWs on Twitter, they are claiming there is no excuse for this. This is a professional NBA broadcaster. He knows the background of every NBA player. He did this on purpose, and if he didn't know the background, he should have known. While this is logical thinking in a perfect world, we don't live in a perfect world. There are damn near 500 players in the NBA. Is it really reasonable to expect a regional NBA broadcaster to know the personal background of every single NBA player? Players are shuffled in and out of the league on a daily basis. Injuries, 10-day contract, G League call-ups. It is impossible to know personal details about every NBA player. Now, if Glenn Consor had made this mistake with a James Harden, Kevin Durant, a superstar level player, it would be a little bit different. The familial information on superstar players is widely known for the most part. Everyone knows Kevin Durant was raised by a single mother in Washington, D.C. Most people probably know her name's Wanda. LeBron James, raised by a single mother. Before last night, how many people you think knew the background of Kevin Porter Jr.? I'll take it a step further. Before last night or before this morning, how many people had even heard of Kevin Porter Jr.? Had you ever heard of him? He was the 30th pick in the draft. His first 2 years in the NBA, he started just 23 games. He was drafted by the Bucks, traded to Cleveland. Before last season, Kevin Porter Jr. was charged for improperly handling a firearm inside a vehicle. Now, if someone wanted to call Glenn Consor's comments off color because of that, because of the arrest, I would get it. I would understand. But to be honest with you, Glenn Consor probably didn't even know about that either. I was unaware of it until I researched the story. Why? Because Kevin Porter Jr. is not a big name in the NBA. Glenn Consor probably would have flew under the radar had it not been for LeBron James. Leave it to LeBron James, the king of the SJWs. Leave it to him to take something like this completely out of context. LeBron quote tweeted the video I played for you earlier. In the tweet, LeBron said, "Oh, he thought this was cool, huh? Nah, we ain't going for this. Sorry, but this ain't gonna fly." How insensitive can you be to say something like this? Beat it, man, I pray for you. But there's no place in our beautiful game for you. Where do I even begin with this stupidity? Why don't we start with we? We ain't going for this. Who the hell is we? Is LeBron talking about his Laker teammates? Is he talking about the entire NBA? Or is he talking about woke Twitter, who he intentionally riled up with this tweet? Number two, LeBron is not stupid. He listened to Glenn Consor's call. He knew the context. How many times have we heard an NFL or NBA announcer use the same phrase, pull the trigger? Used to happen all the time in the past. Is it reasonable to expect that Glenn Consor didn't know the background of Kevin Porter Jr.? Is it reasonable to expect that? Number three, LeBron James called for Glenn Consor to be fired. There is no place in our beautiful game for you. Why? Why? Because the guy made one mistake in 22 years? You mean to tell me LeBron James has never made a mistake, said something he regretted? What about the time when he essentially threatened a cop's life on Twitter? All because he saved the life of a teenage black girl. Remember that? LeBron doing what he does best, jumping to conclusions. He saw a white cop kill a black girl and automatically thought the cop was in the wrong. Turns out the girl was trying to kill the other girl and the cop saved her life. Did LeBron James lose his job over that? Did the mainstream media jump all over him, try to cancel him? Of course not. He didn't even apologize for it after the fact. In my opinion, what LeBron did was far worse than Glenn Consor. It was premeditated. He had time to think about it before using his Twitter fingers. Glenn Consor was on the spot. He was calling a live NBA game. There was no premeditation. There was no time to think. He was reacting live to the situation. I don't know anything about Glenn Consor. He could be the wokest of the woke for all I know. He could be a loyal SJW. I don't care. This has nothing to do with politics. By doing this, LeBron James is encouraging the suppression of free speech. I promise you, every NBA, every NFL, every broadcaster is seeing this. It will create hesitancy. It's only natural to create hesitancy. I have to watch what I say. I have to think about everything I say. It removes all level of comfort in calling a game. And we could sit here and argue all day about whether this comment was unprofessional, off color, whatever. None of that matters in this situation. Did Glenn Consor say this with malicious intent? Did he say this to intentionally hurt Kevin Porter Jr.? If anything, he was being complimentary. He said, you have to give credit to Kevin Porter Jr. He talked about how well designed the play was. Doesn't sound to me like a man with malicious intent. But you know how it is with SJWs. Never let facts, or in this case, context, get in the way of the agenda. Glenn Consor will probably lose his job over this. There's going to be too much pressure on NBC Sports to fire him, God knows. NBC doesn't need any pressure to make a woke decision, and it's a damn shame. It really is. What seems to have been a spotless career ruined over one mistake. All right, let me know what you guys think about this. Do you think Glenn Consor knew the familial background of Kevin Porter Jr.? Sound off in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.